Hey guys, Work here, welcome back to the bench. Today we're going to be doing the modifications to the P07 that I showed you in the unboxing video from Cajun Gunworks. In case you're wondering, there may or may not be a dryer going on in the background, so I'll try to speak up so that you can hear what I'm saying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some trigger modifications to my carry gun, my P07 here. We're going to replace a couple of parts, and we're going to try to get the double action trigger pull down a little bit, while keeping the single action trigger pull right around the 3 to 3.5 pound mark. First thing we got to do, make her safe. It is free and clear. Get these to the side, and let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a baseline, so that we can see what each one of the modifications does to the trigger pull. We're going to mark the pistol trigger with a location that we're going to pull with a pull gauge, and we're going to mark the pull gauge where we're going to pull on the trigger. So go ahead, get a couple of readings here. So this is the double action trigger pull. So the double action trigger pull, you can see, is well over 8 pounds. Single action trigger pull is a little bit different. So the single action trigger pull is around 3.5 pounds. Okay, so our stock numbers with the double action is over 8 pounds. Since that's all my gauge can measure, that's what it's getting. Single action is right around 3.5 pounds. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the hammer spring. Now the reason I'm doing the hammer spring first is because the order that I have to do this kit is one of the main things that we have to do. Now the biggest difference that we're going to see is going to be probably with this kit right here. But this kit requires this hammer spring. So we're going to go ahead and replace the hammer spring, see if that makes any changes. To replace the hammer spring, what we got to do is we got to push this down a little bit and remove this pin. Alright, so now we have the pin out, put your finger over it, pull the punch. And there's the hammer spring. So let's go ahead and replace that. New hammer spring. Goes in like that. Put our plug back on. There we go. Okay, so the new hammer spring's in now. So let's go ahead and see what kind of a difference it made. So this is the double action pull. Okay, so the double action pull is still over 8 pounds. I expected that. Now let's see what the single action pull is. Okay, so the single action pull is still right at 3.5 pounds. Let's run that again. Okay, still right at 3.5 pounds. Let's go ahead and move on to the next major component that we're going to replace. So the next component replacement requires disassembly. So go ahead and pull the slide off. Take a look here and see what we're dealing with. Okay, so now we've got everything apart. So now we've got to put everything back together. So the two major components that we did all this work for is the hammer disconnector and the safety block lid. So I just got it torn down to the part where we can replace the disconnect. So let's go ahead and pull our punch out here. You see our hammer can come out as well as the disconnector. So the disconnect hooks into a small hole there. So we're going to go ahead and replace the disconnect with the new one from the kit. We're just going to put the hammer back down in there. So now with the hammer and the disconnect pulled back up, we can reinsert our pin and make sure that the disconnector is back where it needs to be. So let's go ahead and do this in reverse order. We're going to put our sear back in. So the next thing that we're going to replace is the firing pin block.
It's the procedure's the same. Now, if you notice, what you got left is the hammer and the disconnector. And what you need to notice is how the disconnector.
Okay. So we're going to put this back in here. We got our sear in. I've got things kind of lined up. I'm going to line them up on this side with my punch. The sear lined up. Okay. So now let's get this pin back in. Push back down the sear. Alright, so he's back in now. Let's go ahead and get ejector put back in. There we go. Let's get the safety back in here. Get the spring on. See if we can get this in here. This little dingle here goes into a hole. There we go. Alright, so that's all back together. Now we need to get our spring back in. And then we'll work on the top half. Alright, so there's the bottom half. Let's go ahead and get the top half done now. So the top half, we're going to go ahead and disassemble the slide. What we got to do now is we got to get the firing pin out. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drive this roll pin out. Okay. So now I've got that roll pin punched out. I think it was a pain in the ass to get out of there. So now when I pull this punch out, the firing pin should kind of pop back a little bit. And there it is. So there's a firing pin. Now, if I press down on the firing pin safety block, I should be able to just pull the firing pin right out, along with the spring. Oh, that's not the spring, that's the firing pin safety block. So there's the firing pins. So now we can see the old versus the new firing pin. The new firing pin should be slightly longer. There you go. So let's go ahead and put the new firing pin in. We're actually going to cheat a little bit here. So we're going to go ahead and do both of these mods at the same time. Unfortunately, just because of the way the firing pin has to be taken out, it's kind of a pain in the butt. So we're going to go ahead and put this reduced power plunger in. Push that down. Put our firing pin back in. Okay, so now our firing pin is back in. So now I need to go back out, and I need to put this roll pin back in. Be back after these messages. Alright guys, and we're back. We've got our new firing pin in, we've got our new kit in, so let's give this a try. Let's see what kind of difference we made. Should probably put it back together first. So there we're back together. Again, we're free and clear. Let's hit this back to the trigger pull gate and see what happens. Now the name of this kit is the Short Reset Kit. And it does not lie, that is a short reset. So let's do the double action trigger pull first. It is just over 8 pounds now instead of a long ways over 8 pounds. Let's give the single action a shot. Okay, so the single action is now 3.4 pounds. We've reduced our double action a little bit, but it's still over 8 pounds, and our single action has dropped about 1/10 of a pound. But the single action is noticeably smoother now. So now we're going to do the last modification that I've got, which is replacing the trigger spring itself. We're going to see if that gives us a little bit of a change. Let's tear it down first. Okay. That's the last bit. Let's get this thing back together. Let's do one more check. Here's from the double action. It is definitely lowered now. It's still just over 8 pounds, but I think now it's just over 8 pounds. The trigger actually starts moving around 7.5 now, which is way better than it was. Before, I had to bottom this thing out all the way, and it still wasn't grabbing it. Let's check the single action pull now. Okay. Hey guys, back at the bench now. It's been about a week since I did the work to my P07. I had some sick kids right near the end doing the project, so my recording didn't end up quite as complete as I wanted it to. But to summarize a little bit, the stock configuration of my P07, the double action trigger pull was well over 8 pounds, and the single action was just right around 3.5 pounds. After I put the short reset kit from Cajun Gunworks on, the double action was still over 8 pounds. The single action dropped 0.1 pounds to 3.4. I could tell that the double action was much smoother at this point, but it didn't drop the weight by a whole lot. Surprisingly enough, the biggest change of the entire setup was the trigger spring. The trigger spring pulled my double action pull down to a solid 8 pounds, and my single action was reduced down to 3 pounds, which is right on the verge of where I wanted it. I'm really happy with the modifications that I did. The trigger really ended up being nice and smooth. I can pull through the double action trigger really easily now, and I don't feel like I need to stage it in order to get a nice clean shot off. The single action is obviously extremely crisp with a very short reset now. I was a little concerned with reducing the single action weight and the possibility of accidental follow-up shots, but I didn't have any of that. I was taking multiple single shots as well as double shots, and this increased my double tap accuracy immensely between the new sights that we put on and the trigger. How easy it was to get the first shot and the second shot off and keep it on target. I think these modifications that I did are really nice. They don't change the trigger enough to where it's a competition-only trigger or a hair trigger even. They do just enough to give you a little bit more confidence when you're using your firearm. Between the trigger and the sights, I think the sights are actually a better use of your money. The trigger modifications were great, but those sights are so much better than stock that it's not even funny. So that's all I have for this time. Remember to like this video. If you like what you see, hit the subscribe button down below. And remember, until next time, do your research, get informed, and get to work.